Welcome everyone to the MFM's Zoom webinar. This is number 10. I'm Adam Reifsteck, and co-hosting this event with me is Jeffrey Green, and we're speaking on the best practices for setting up your home studio. And this event is hosted by the Musicians for Musicians organization, which seeks to bring together musicians from all disciplines, styles, traditions, and localities in their cause for mutual self-betterment, whether through education, networking, or political action. MFM's ultimate goal is to elevate the work of all musicians to the level of a true profession. So we invite you to visit our website at musiciansformusicians.org to get involved. We're a membership organization, and our activities are supported by our members. So again, as I mentioned today, we're talking about getting your home studio, setting it up for success. And with today's technology, it enables musicians to record their own music from home on a very small budget. But the process of setting up your home studio can be very daunting, especially for newcomers. So we're going to discuss some best practices and recommendations for getting that pro level sound and do-it-yourself recordings. So for those of you that don't know who I am, as I mentioned, I'm Adam Reifsteck, and I'm a New York-based composer, producer, and I own a record label called Teknofonic Recordings. We've had over 350 releases on the label, many of which have charted in the Beatport Top 100. And as a composer, I've written several original compositions for small ensembles, and I produce electronic music. And and with me is Jeff Green. So Jeff lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he's also a composer, and he's a cellist and multi-instrumentalist. And he's, as we alluded to in a little bit earlier, he's been working at Sweetwater Sound for almost 30 years. And he holds a music engineering technology degree from Ball State University. So welcome everybody. And with that, just kind of want to get, we're kind of keeping this a little bit casual and sort of sharing our experiences in setting up our own home studios. And Jeff is also sharing some knowledge that he has from helping hundreds of, and if not thousands of other musicians through Sweetwater, and his experience with providing recommendations on what you need to get started. So with that, I guess I'll turn the question over to you, Jeff. This is kind of I guess the big question is where do you even start?
Yes, where do you start indeed?
Yeah.
I think back to the early days of when the home recording studio revolution was kind of starting, 20, 30 years ago, it feels like. And folks could buy a Mackie 8-bus analog board and a couple ADATs, or before that, a tape machine of some sort. And of course, now there's such a huge plethora of ways to even get started. You could have the most basic studio with a laptop and a pair of headphones, or going into something that's, rivaling, some of the better professional recording studios out there. When folks reach out to me, my first question to them really is, what is the goal of your home studio? What's the focus? What kind of quality level do you need? Is this going to be, recording your band? Is it going to be recording others and charging money for that? Is it just for voiceovers, for podcasting, for, just being able to record an instrument or two? Are you just going to be tracking? Do you need to be doing mixing and mastering, sort of things? So that really kind of dictates, I think, where folks will go with the studio. I tend to focus on what I would consider the front end and the back end studio as being kind of the most important aspects. So what by that would be, the front end would be, a good quality microphone, or if you're a guitarist, having some kind of processor or DI/preamp, or, that sort of thing, as well as presumably that you're going to be using a computer and going with, whatever the proper audio interface may be. So that's kind of, a lot of the front end of what I would consider in the studio. And then the back end would be monitoring, specifically, what kind of studio monitors you might be using or headphones. And then everything else kind of fills in the middle with a lot of that. So, choosing a computer, and whether you're going a PC or Mac, whether it's going to be a laptop or some kind of desktop machine, getting into the proper DAW software, whether that's enough for what you need or continue to add on to there, and looking at hardware and then workflow. So there's obviously, I'm probably confusing things more than anything by throwing all this out there. But that's in essence kind of the focus on where to start with the home studio situation. So I can definitely extrapolate into any one of those categories as far as that goes.
Yeah, so I guess probably just to kind of recap a little bit or kind of frame the discussion. So there, I mean, I guess there's probably, maybe break it down to kind of this 10 kind of things that you need to get started. And one you kind of mentioned was the space, in terms of where you're actually going to set it up in your home studio. And then the computer, obviously, audio interface, then the studio monitors, and then the digital audio workstation, the microphones, then headphones, and then like a MIDI keyboard and cables and room treatment. So I guess maybe if we just kind of go down that list and see what your recommendations are, somebody that's starting to build their home studio. So first is space, I guess. Where is kind of the ideal space to record? And obviously it varies, but what are kind of your recommendations or experience in terms of setting up the room?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up actually on that, Adam, because I think a lot of folks really gloss over thinking about room acoustics and sound absorption, that sort of thing. I get a lot of phone calls from people that are concerned about sound leaking out into the environment, depending on if their home studio is going to be next to the baby's room in their house, and all the other parameters that could happen that way. And to a certain degree, with acoustics, a lot of folks would look at some of like the software packages that are available, that would have like a microphone, to be able to kind of determine what's happening in the room and then apply, corrective aspects within a software environment. And a lot of those are amazing, and can work really well in a home environment. But I think it's important to also look at actually putting physical acoustic treatment within them. Companies, Oralex, a lot of folks might be familiar with them, have an actual room analysis for free available on their website, obviously with the idea that they're wanting you to use their products. But I reference that a lot, where folks can go basically sketch out something on a napkin if they want to, email or fax that into Oralex. They'll come back with a detailed room analysis, just talking about where bass absorbers, diffusion material, all of that sort of thing can be placed in the room. And then you can use that as a starting point to really kind of dial things in. Obviously, most home environments are not very ideal acoustically. A lot of square rooms and rectangular rooms that have, cause a lot of problems, especially with the low end of the frequency spectrum, which is, really where things are critical. And I've never seen a room where it would cause a problem to add some kind of bass absorption, specifically, can really rectify a lot of problems. The software that I mentioned previously, companies like IK Multimedia have their ARC system, SonarWorks has their software as well, which will basically give you like a flat target that they determine after you analyze the room by setting up a microphone and recording into your system. The problem with that is that so many rooms are so bad acoustically that the EQ curve that it will put like on your master bus in your software will cause your speakers and whatnot to sound so skewed that it's hard to listen to them or deal with them. So I think it's important for folks to think about adding, physical acoustic materials to their room. And, it can make a huge difference too, just putting, drapes across windows, putting carpets down, on wooden floors. There's a million different products that are on the market now that can help with, if you've got a guitar amp or a bass amp in your room, you could put basically like a floating floor underneath that with acoustic materials. We sell millions of things like reflection filters that go, around your microphone. That can really be a blessing for folks that are doing, voiceover work or podcasting or really any kind of work with a microphone, to kind of, eliminate all the bad areas of your room that way and give you some kind of, absorptive capability that way. So yeah, definitely a very important aspect of everything. And, I think about things like acoustics, where it's not the sexiest thing to talk about. People would rather, talk about buying a cool mic or a guitar or a processor or whatever, or keyboard. But I think it's critical to start with that if possible, because if you don't, if you're not able to record properly or be able to listen to what you're doing, it makes things very difficult otherwise. So.
Yeah, and you can even do it like on the low budgets. I've done stuff where I put blankets up, and
Sure,
stuff instead
absolutely.
of actually, especially in a Manhattan apartment, you can't really do much in terms of if you're renting.
Yeah. I'm out here in the Midwest where, there's lots of space and everything.
Yeah.
And so I empathize with you guys in your small apartments in New York.
Yeah, so getting creative and using those software tools, I think is a game changer for sure. As the Sonar works, I've been able to tune my room through that in my headphones and also monitors. So
yeah, if folks aren't familiar with the Sonar works, I think it's pretty amazing software where there's two components to it, I think there's probably 200 or 300 different profiles of various headphones, all the most popular ones on the market. So if you happen to own a pair of those headphones, you can use that profile that SonarWorks has that's generated, modeled in their software. And they also do the same thing for speakers. And that can make an enormous difference for sure.
Yeah, and for somebody like myself, which is in in a Manhattan apartment, going back to that, is the investing in a good pair of headphones sometimes over, because the with the way the headphones are now, it's just as good, if not better, than some of the monitoring systems. So you can get away with a lot with just headphones. So what I guess we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later on setting up listening environments. But I guess the big question, and I'm sure you get all the time, is when you're piecing together your workstation, your what you're going to record on your computer, Mac or PC? What do you?
Yeah, I don't want to start any fights. But,
well, I'll tell you from my experience what I started with Mac, and it was a lot of my decision was kind of driven by the DAW that I chose, the digital audio workstation. And I started with Pro Tools, and then I got Ableton, worked with Ableton a little bit, and then I discovered Cakewalk Sonar, which was PC only. So then I made the switch to PC and haven't looked back. So so a lot of that has to do with that. But I mean, in terms of your experience, what has been your recommendation?
Yeah, well, I'm sure most folks are aware nowadays, just about everything is cross-platform now. Mm-hmm. So, especially there's very few DAWs I can think of that would be PC or Mac only at this point. So I think a lot of it just comes down to both budget as well as, just your general familiarity with Mac versus PC. I feel like there's a lot of overlap between them now. Apple is still a price point compared to a lot of PCs out there. At Sweetwater, give us a little plug here. We sell our own Creation Station PCs, where we've got a whole team of guys that build these machines, and we go into very in-depth detail on each machine, where we strip out a lot of the stuff that comes with a standard off-the-shelf Dell or whatever out there, and that can definitely make a leaner, meaner machine. I have a lot of my customers and clients get frustrated. A lot of all the extra kind of multimedia stuff that's loaded into a lot of PCs and that sort of thing, and it's a case where that can get frustrating. And there's some of that in the Mac world as well. But I would say, frankly, it's really about 50-50 with the folks that I talk to out there between the two worlds. And I really don't see a big advantage in either direction. I think, people have their opinions about Windows operating systems and, and all of that. I guess I have seen maybe a small movement more towards the Mac side of things over the years, just as they become more popular in general to the world. But I really don't see a compelling reason to go one versus the other, frankly. I don't know if anybody would want to chime in on that or not. But.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh man, but there's so much to cover. But I did want to quickly say that early on in my career, I felt like I had to stay on both PC and Mac platforms so I could deliver to one or the other. And then even early on, the Amiga was in there. I had 3 systems going, and then I finally got, it got so annoying keeping OSs updated on all 3 platforms that, the Amiga eventually died out. But then I just took the plunge and said, okay, I'm not doing PC anymore. I stayed with Mac, and I have to say, in the last half dozen years, I'm cursing Apple all the time. Wish I'd stayed with Linux. Linux seems to have the same, think different vibe that Mac used to have. Mac is now think corporate, and they've hamstrung me in so many places where they really kind of want you to stay in their ecosystem. They've made iTunes which is now music, whatever is completely ridiculous platform. And I used to, do all my music librarian stuff through iTunes, and that's no longer any good. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, you make some good points, Peter. And I think it's a case too where, how do I want to put it? With a lot of the folks I work with, I urge them, once they get a stable system up and going, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't chase every little upgrade for your DAW and all your plugins and everything else. And I know that's easier said than done a lot of times, but I sense a lot of frustration from folks out there from having to deal with all those different parameters of different, audio interfaces and DAWs, and, feeling that they constantly have to upgrade, and, what Avid and Pro Tools is doing sometimes causes a lot of frustration based around all that. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Cool. So once you kind of have your room set up, the computer that you're gonna be working on, and then next, I guess, is choosing the audio interface. I guess the way I looked at it is like how many inputs I needed, because I started with a PreSonus FirePod, and then of course FirePod FireWire got replaced with Thunderbolt, so that became obsolete. But and then I moved into smaller interfaces because I didn't really need that many channels. So is that fair to say, kind of how you look at it and how you approach it, is like how many inputs that you're going to be needing?
Yeah, I would. That's definitely a key aspect of it. Also, how many microphone preamps are built in. That kind of plays into the whole question of, are you going to plug your whole studio into your audio interface? Are you going to be using a separate mixer to submix and route things? We use that mixer as an audio interface. I mean, we could talk for hours about all the different audio interfaces that are on the market and the pluses and minuses that way. Hopefully Thunderbolt is going to stick around for a while, at least on the Apple side of things. And so hopefully that'll maintain some stability that way, because that can be frustrating, like you were discussing, jumping from USB to FireWire or USB 3 to Thunderbolt, and that's an in-depth discussion at times. But yeah, absolutely. The size of the interface is generally the first thing that's discussed, and that's what most folks base it around. Yeah, I can tell you, to my knowledge, our biggest selling audio interfaces are the Universal Audio Apollo series. And not necessarily to plug them here, but it's, they do make some great products, and it's a case where part of the reason they're so popular is that they have the built-in DSP to be able to run their plugins, which is similar to kind of an older Pro Tools system that way. So that's attractive to a lot of folks. They also have their Unison technology, which is part of their preamps, which actually reconfigures some of the circuitry to be able to get some different flavors from your microphones. And that's tied in with their software in a pretty interesting way. So that's one area that we tend to sell a lot of, but obviously there's a ton of great interfaces on the market that we could explore that way too.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely based on size and number of inputs that you need, for sure. So I guess, and then the next, obviously after the interface comes the monitoring environment, whether you're doing headphones like this or monitors. I have to laugh because since I run a record label for electronic music, I see some of the artists I work with that are bedroom producers are producing on like big monitors that are way too big for their room, So
Sure.
so obviously comes into play in terms of size of the monitoring. So kind of where would you sort of recommend like just starting with the monitoring environment?
Well, in my opinion, I think having both a good set of near field monitors as well as headphones both is fairly critical. There are a lot of folks that are doing full productions now with just headphones, but I think that's making life more difficult. I think it's a case where having some speakers in a physical room is still an important aspect of all of this. In saying that, headphones have made great strides. I mean, there's some amazingly good headphones that are on the market now that are not that expensive. It might be worth for us to jump into the whole open versus closed back on headphones, because that's a very common question that I get. And the main difference is a closed back headphones, the sound does not leak out into the room. So if it's a case where you're using a microphone and you're concerned about that, a closed back headphone is the way to go. Generally speaking, open back headphones have a reputation for traditionally being better sounding and more natural sounding. But it's a case where there are some really good closed back headphones on the market now that are made by a variety of the major manufacturers that can work, in my opinion, almost or sometimes as well as open backs that way. And I think you make a good point, Adam, in terms of the size of, jumping over into into the size of the speakers and the size of the room. And that's something we could talk again for hours, but I'm often telling my clients that I work with that they would be better off using smaller near field monitors and possibly adding a subwoofer to that, as opposed to using larger near field speakers. When you look at the physics and calculate what's happening with monitors, some of these lower waveforms, they don't have any way to really propagate in the size of the rooms that we're talking about here. So often going with smaller near fields, which I would consider like 6.5-inch woofers or smaller, and then potentially adding a sub if that's necessary. And a lot of times, like in my own room here, I've got a subwoofer here where I keep it off most of the time, and I just kick it on selectively when I feel like I need to hear the subsonic information. You do a lot with electronic music and dance music, and there's a lot of critical stuff that can happen down there. But it's a case where I think a lot of times just cleaning up a recording, one tool that you can use is just putting like a high pass filter on a lot of your tracks to get rid of that kind of subsonic information that tends to rob a lot of mixes of their energy. And with the larger speakers, sometimes it's really difficult to hear that properly. So having that combination of both, I think, is pretty important.
Yeah, there's also in the electronic world, there's also the sub pack, which is an actual backpack for the sub, and that it emulates the sub, which is super interesting. A lot of electronic music producers use that. So so I guess then the next step. So we got that environment set up, and then so your thoughts on the digital audio workstation, because I guess they are very, very different. There's kind of like maybe two classes, I guess. The one that's kind of follows the traditional emulation of a console, and then there's the creative ones like Ableton, where kind of it has a whole different creative approach. So in terms of approaching that for recording, how do you, what do you recommend?
Well, it seems like the starting point for most folks is Pro Tools by Avid, for better or worse. And it's a case where, it's been around for a long time. It's still the most DAW that's being used in the world. If you're having to share projects with other folks, other musicians that might be recording, other producers, mixers, Pro Tools files are still the most ubiquitous way to go out there. And, there's a way you can grab a $99 version of Pro Tools if you're more comfortable working in some other DAW, and be able to fairly easily translate those tracks over that way to share. I would say, from what I've seen though, DAWs like Ableton have grown immensely in popularity. And, that comes from more of a DJ kind of looping type of world, but it's really grown, to incorporate more traditional recording, I would say. I personally use Ableton quite a bit, probably more than any other DAW at this point, and I like the workflow. One of the things I like about it, and I talked to a lot of my folks about it, is that if you're using Ableton in the studio, it can really translate to a live performance effectively. So, you can take the same session you're working on in the studio, port that over on your laptop into Ableton, and, you're performing live with basically everything you're doing in the studio without really having to translate that. Presonus' Studio One DAW is gained quite a bit in popularity. For folks that don't know, they were all former Steinberg Cubase engineers that Presonus basically hired to make Studio One, and they were able to basically redesign the DAW from beginning to end. It's got some interesting features in it where you're able to, do CD burning within the software, and it's got a lot of nice mastering tools. It's got a lot of vocal correction tools with a version of Melodyne built into it. So that appeals to a lot of folks that way. And it works very well, both cross-platform on Mac and PC. We could talk a lot about other DAWs. I mean, there's quite a few to choose from. I would say really gaining in popularity just over the last couple of years, used to be known as Free Loops, is now FL Studio. And, a lot of engineers might turn their nose up at that software, but there is a ton of electronic music being generated directly from that DAW. And it's got a lot of great tools in there for especially in my mind, for beginning producers. But it's gotten fairly sophisticated now as well. So that's probably worth taking a peek at.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I'll kind of like I work in primarily Ableton these days, and then I'll bounce into Cubase for different things. So it kind of, I think the way I approach it is like it based on your workflow. And a lot of these companies have trials, trial versions. So if you're just starting out and trying to figure out which DAW to use, I always recommend trying out the trial versions and kind of get used to which one kind of makes sense for your brain, because you don't want to get stuck in the middle of like an idea and then not being able to do it.
That brings a good point too, where I talk to a lot of folks who get frustrated in making music because they don't know how to arrange. And they'll get a 4-bar loop going and they don't know what to do with it past that. Something like Ableton is really effective, where you're basically having little chunks of audio or MIDI that you can arrange quickly and easily, almost like a Tetris game, and basically build tracks that way. And I find that's an effective tool, and it's kind of a change of your mindset to going from a linear based recording like Pro Tools to something that's a little bit more non-linear, where you can build up arrangements and stack ideas and do things like that. And that was really appealing for me personally with Ableton.
So I guess that leads into like the recording device. If you're not doing just instrumentals or doing direct with guitar into the audio interface or the DAW. In terms of microphones, obviously that is there's a lot of different ones out there, but in terms of what you recommend, in terms of I guess we'll probably just start maybe with vocals, because I see that being a big challenge for a lot of people starting out, because I see them, people on Instagram and TikTok and stuff, they're using, definitely you can tell like they're using the wrong microphone,
Right.
so like
Sure.
I guess there's kind of like the two classes, right? There's the dynamic and the condenser. So maybe starting there, I guess.
Sure.
What would you say?
Sure. So without getting too technical about it, dynamic microphone generally is less sensitive, often used more in live sound. But I'll tell you, the one microphone that's just in my mind has been revolutionary, and it's really gotten a second life with, during the pandemic, with everybody, choosing to get into podcasting and that sort of thing, is the Shure SM7B microphone. It's around a $400 microphone. It's very physically large. I think it's a brilliant microphone, and I think that would be a good starting point for a lot of folks at home. Part of the reason that it's an advantage is that in being less sensitive than a condenser microphone, it's not going to pick up every little noise that's happening in your apartment. It's not going to pick up the trucks going by and the dogs barking and, all the other issues that folks have at home that way. Yet it has a brilliant, large, kind of larger than life sound to it. You can get up on the microphone and have some proximity effect happening. And I think that mic specifically, it would be a good one to look at for vocals. For folks that are on more of a budget, the good old Shure SM58, probably everybody knows that microphone, and again, often used in live sound, but I think could also be effectively used in a studio setting. They also have their SM57, which both of those are under $100, and those can be good for instrumental miking, as well as occasionally for vocals, depending on the voice. I think a lot of times it's a situation where I would recommend to folks that they listen to some of the audio files that are up on the web. It's a case where there's been a lot of different shootouts of various, sponsored by a lot of different websites out there. And it's a case where depending on what the nature of your voice is, that really, because there's no one size fits all microphone. And if obviously differences in female and male vocals, and if you're going to be recording other folks as well, and what their characteristics of their voices are, can all play into that. But that would be a couple microphones right off the top of my head that I think could be really effective.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess then we kind of touched on the headphones and such. We had the discussion of the open back versus closed back. I guess if you're, I'm trying to say, I guess in terms of, anything else that you would recommend in terms of that front before we move on to another topic?
Well, again, the closed back headphones, if you're going to be singing into a microphone, are pretty much a necessity. Otherwise, the audio, and especially things like clicks from a or drum part or something, are coming through into the microphone. Actually, if I may, on that end, while I'm thinking about it, just on the microphone side of things.
Yeah.
Obviously we all can't have a whole closet full of great mics that we can choose from and experiment with. There's a couple mic systems on the market, I think, that are brilliant in what they do. Mm. So one is made by a company called Townsend Labs. It's called the Spear microphone. So what's interesting about this mic is that it's not just a microphone, but a software package that comes along with it. So it models a lot of very high dollar vintage microphones, and whether it sounds exactly like them or not, I think is almost besides the point, because it's a great sounding microphone in its own right. But what you can do then in the software, it has a dual diaphragm in it, 2 diaphragms, so you can go in and actually change the polar pattern of your recording after the fact. Mm-hmm. So if you need to make it wider or more narrow, and there's a million other creative aspects that can be utilized that way. But if somebody's going to buy one microphone to cover as much as they possibly can, I would recommend that microphone. There's a similar system from Slate called the VMS, Vocal Microphone System. That's a similar concept. That's about half the price of the Townsend. In my opinion, it's not quite as good. but it's very good nonetheless. And something like that might be worth looking into for a lot of folks, just, that want to own one microphone that could cover a huge range that way.
Cool. So the other essential part, at least in my opinion, that's obviously this is optional, but is the MIDI keyboard. So like I have, for example, on my desk here, I have the Novation Launchpad or the Novation Launch Key. So that's real handy because it's very small. And what I love about MIDI keyboards too is the automating the tasks. Like they have like knobs and stuff for macros that map to the DAW, where you can instead of like point and clicking, you're physically touching buttons to trigger different things. So what are kind of your recommended starting points, I guess, for deciding on what to look for in terms of getting a MIDI keyboard?
Well, boy, there's another category where there's just a million,
but I guess
billion options.
High level view. Yeah,
sure.
we're talking. Yeah.
So, so the questions I would ask in that situation would be, how many keys do you need? Do you need an 88 key instrument? And does it need to feel like a piano? Does it need to be weighted hammer action instrument? Or can you get away with something that's more of a synth action? Do you want something that has a lot of knobs and faders for MIDI control? Or is it something where you're just going to play it more like a digital piano? So that will play into a lot of all that. Then there are, so you, like the Novation instrument, they have their own MIDI mapping software and the way they work with a lot of different things. And so a lot of folks will look at things like the Native Instruments complete controls if they're using their software. And it's a case where, that'll automatically map everything to that instrument on that keyboard, more or less automatically. And it's a case where that's really appealing for a lot of folks instead of having to go in and, map everything manually that way. So that can kind of dictate, what virtual instruments you're using and whether you might want to consider like a Native Instruments versus a Novation versus an Arturia versus, on and on and on that way. And so, looking at that part of it, do you need an 88, a 76, a 61 note, a 49, a 32 note controller? How much desk space do you have? And so, it's a difficult question to answer because there's so many different options and so many different ways that people use them. So that's probably not the best answer, but I'm not sure if I can go much further there.
Yeah, that's great. So I guess, and then that kind of leads us to the final point is like kind of like the ancillary stuff, like in terms of mic stands and shock mounts and stuff. Like I'm not using this today, but I have a condenser here with a shock mount, and I have a desk microphone stand, so it's like attached. It's an arm attached to my desk. So depending on what you're doing and stuff, I guess keep it. Don't forget those ancillary things that will help with your recording. So what kind of like I guess again the topic is very wide, but what would you say is kind of, I guess, rounding this conversation out, like the key essentials for getting started with
I'm glad you asked on that, Adam. So one thing that I think is really overlooked often that's critical is power.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys being there in New York, there's a lot of issues with power in older buildings and whatnot. With a lot of the digital components that are being sold nowadays, those are really susceptible to brownouts and power surges and those kind of things. And, here in Indiana, they're talking about having rolling blackouts this summer, with all the heat that's happening. And so that's something that's certainly not sexy at all to buy a power conditioner, but it's critical. And I would urge folks as well to go a step further to actually get a voltage regulator, which, does exactly what it says, regulates the incoming voltage as it comes in, as opposed to just a power conditioner. I know a voltage regulator is going to cost you minimum $400 or $500, but I really think it's a good investment. It's something you could certainly add later, but at a minimum, going with some kind of power conditioning, a good rack mounted unit that'll give you 8 outlets that'll power your whole studio, you can get for, a little over $100. And that can make a pretty substantial difference in terms of the performance of your gear that way. So, yeah, don't overlook the power side of things. You know, I'm a big proponent of buying good quality cabling as well. People want to cheap out on cables all the time, but it just ends up, you end up spending the money anyway, eventually, or re-spending the money. And it's a case where it makes a difference. And anything that's carrying audio, you know, I would at least buy a high quality microphone cable, and also a high quality cable to go from your audio interface to your speakers. To me, those are the two areas where they can make a substantial difference. What else could we talk about? So you mentioned sorry, I was going to say mic stands.
Yeah, I saw Peter raise his hand. I think he had something to chime in on that.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah. All right, no, I just want to ask a question about, Jeff, is anybody making a polyphonic aftertouch keyboard with that polyphonic aftertouch? That seems to have disappeared, and it's such a cool feature. I know it uses up a lot of CPU, and I don't know anybody that makes them anymore.
Yeah, actually, I believe are you familiar with the Hydrasynth from ASM?
No.
Really new company, but that's an amazing instrument that has polyphonic aftertouch. And they make several different sizes of that keyboard. It uses a bunch of synthesis technologies. So it's got both subtractive synthesis, FM, wavetable, all of that built into it. So that might be worth taking a look at. Or are we talking controllers or just?
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, I would like just a controller, but, you know, it used to be, it used to be on the original emulator. And no, not the emulator, the Mirage had polyphonic aftertouch. And I think the original Kurzweil MIDI board, but then it just kind of disappeared. It's not on DX7s. It wasn't on anything after that.
Yeah, you know, I feel like there's one or two others, but I don't know what they are off the top of my head. Yeah, I could get back to you.
So this okay, great, thanks.
Sure.
The other thing was I totally agree with you about the SM7. I just today was in really a state-of-the-art radio studio where I'm going to be moving. I've been delivering my radio shows to them each week, and now I'm going to be going. They put me in a civilized hour. I used to be in Siberia at 5 o'clock in the morning, and now I'm going to be on on Sunday afternoons. So I went in there to do a voiceover, and I've been doing my voiceovers with a SM57 and using isotope plugins, Nectar, and, you know, sweetening it up through plugins. But man, and I'm also in my studio. It's in a sort of a factory building. I've got woodworkers nearby. I have to turn off the AC every time I record. The fact that this SM7B was so present and so there, I could just it blew my mind, the difference between that and what I'm used to recording with.
It makes a big difference, doesn't it? Starting out with a strong signal as opposed to having to polish that after the fact.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great tools for that, but yeah, there's no substitute for starting with something high quality that way. So yeah, it's a brilliant microphone in my mind. There's one there's one other one that's slightly cheaper, made by Electro Voice, called the RE20, that a lot of folks know. That's been around for a long time, and a lot of folks compare those two microphones. So that might be something else to check out. But the SM7B in my mind is the king of high quality dynamic microphones.
So Jeffrey, sounds like you set up a couple studios. Look like you're in one now.
Right.
What's the range, say? I know it can vary of listening to you guys. I have a lot of stuff here at my house. I have the room, I have the space. I got stuff like microphones and I got a EQ and all that, but I never really, I thought about setting up a studio. What's maybe a price range, say in the past, or, you know, say, you might say, well, really to set up a beginner studio, you might need $4 or $5 grand, or you might need 10 grand. What's a price range as far as, say, a beginning studio type setup to maybe a more evolved
profession?
Yeah, I would say, you know, the biggest variable is going to be the cost of the computer. Since everybody, more or less is using a computer nowadays. So that, are we talking a $500 laptop, or are we talking a fully decked out, iMac, let's say, for $3,000, $4,000? So that part is a little bit tricky. But in my mind, I've kind of used the numbers in the past. In a beginning studio setup, I'd put it around the $2,000 to $2,500 range. So that would get you a decent computer, a decent little audio interface, possibly a good little microphone, and then some headphones, maybe, and then toss in a little bit of extra software, and you're pretty much good to go, in a beginning setup that way, in my mind. So, a mid-range studio, generally, I'd say $5,000, $6,000, and then, $10K plus is going to get you more into the big boys that way. It's kind of,
a lot of people are using Pro Tools. Even in some of the big studios, they're using Pro Tools.
Yep.
Right, for sure. Yeah, the Pro Tools, they just changed their different levels that they have now, but there's more or less an entry level of Pro Tools, like I mentioned before, that's $99, that's surprisingly capable and would allow you to do some basic multi-track recording with some good quality plugins, and a good starting point for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and it also largely depends in terms of what you're working in, and genre specific too. Like with Pro Tools, a lot of it's standard for recording, but if you get into some of the like with film music, Cubase is widely used for film, and then Ableton for electronic music. So a lot of it maybe determines, I would say, a good bit of it of what genre that you produce in. So determines on what one is kind of the most prolific in that particular style of music. So,
now,
and that's
Adam, you're in Manhattan?
Yep.
You have your own studio, or do you use a studio?
No, I work out of here, so I've gotten used to the deficiencies in my room, and that's after you do it long enough. I've been living in Manhattan for about 12 years now, so I guess I've gotten used to recording and mixing in an apartment. So and I'm do mostly with headphones, but also check on monitors and never ended up with getting a subwoofer, but I have a pair of M Audios that I got in college that I still work. Once you the thing about with audio equipment and stuff too, you get used to kind of your environment. So just as you're experimenting with it, and that's why they kind of say, do the car test, which, taking it to your mix to different listening environments, because then you'll start to hear, where the deficiencies are. So I knew, like, in my particular room, I have like this resonance around like 600, what was like between 300 and 600 hertz there. There's like this, notch there that I have to work with. So it just comes down to getting used to your equipment, just as you get used to your instrument. So
yeah, I think that's a great point.
For Jeffrey, can I ask Jeffrey a question? Hi,
Hi.
Jeffrey. Kevin Kuhn here, New York City.
Kevin.
I've been running a home studio since the earth was cooling. I started out with a Tascam 3304, worked up to an 80-8. My last tape machine was an MS-16, which Ed Siletti modded to run at 30 IPS.
Nice.
Great machine. All right. So anyway, I have a new room in Manhattan now. I mean, it's my same old apartment, but I've dedicated one room to it. It's all plaster and lath, and it's 10-foot ceiling, and it's 10 foot by 12 foot. You had mentioned earlier, there was a program where you set up a mic and it would kind of give you a curve for the room. I know I need to treat the room because it's plaster and lath, and I snap my fingers and it echoes.
Mm-hmm.
So I've made a whole bunch of records in my various apartments in Manhattan. I've been there for 35 years, but I want to start. I'm starting from scratch now, and I have all my gear. I've got all my monitors and everything. So I think what I want to know is, you had talked about being a program where you set up a mic in the middle of the room and you play something and it gives you your room curve. What is that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ones. The one I think is most well known is made by IK Multimedia.
IK Multimedia?
right? And the product is called ARC, A-R-C, which stands for, I believe, automatic room correction. It's the third version of it now, ARC 3. So it's a microphone and software package. So it's pretty cool. It steps you through it where you basically set up a microphone in your listening position, then it sends out test tones from your speakers. And then there are also other parts of your room that it will instruct you to place the microphone in different areas. And then you'll mathematically pull it all together that way. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean,
it's I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's maybe $250 total for everything.
Right.
So I think it's generally money well spent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just in terms of room treatments, you were talking about Auralex and just hanging stuff, and do they make an inexpensive Helmholtz resonator for the back of the room?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of acoustic products that are on the market now. What I would urge you to do, if you have, go to Auralex's website, and I think I want to say it's called Personalized Room Analysis, if I remember correctly. And basically, like I mentioned before, you could sketch out just the dimensions of the room there and give them as much detail as possible. Tell them where your windows are, where the doors are, how high the ceiling is, like you just mentioned, and they'll come back with a detailed analysis and show you where you can put absorption, diffusion, bass traps, all that. And I think with a lot of rooms, it might be a really nice sounding live room where you just need to control it a little bit. Using diffusers instead of absorbers might be worth thinking about that way, where you're kind of scattering the sound, but keeping the liveness of it, if that appeals to you. So there's so many different ways.
It totally does. I mean, I've already done some guitar tracks in there, and in the past, I used a 212 high watt and stuck a 414 facing the ceiling. That'd be great.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Big fun.
I dropped a link to that, the RLX room analysis, in the chat of this meeting. So
thanks, Adam.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd be happy to chat in more detail about any of that with you offline. Or yeah.
All right. Hey, by the way, were you involved with the studio at Ball State?
Yes.
I did a record date out there a couple of years back with Sutton Foster.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, most of the gear in that facility came from me, which I was thankful for.
Yeah, no, it was a wonderful facility.
Yeah, I work with a lot of universities. Yeah, and it's they really went all out there, and it took a lot.
They sure did. And, I kind of walked in like, wow, man. I mean, I'm an old Philly guy, and I used to work at Sigma Sound.
Sure.
Back in the day, and there was a day. But yeah, no, that was a beautiful facility.
Excellent.
I loved it. Yeah.
Great. Glad you enjoyed it.
I did.
Yeah. And actually, while we're talking about acoustics too, a lot of people seem to gloss over this nowadays, but gobos can work wonders in a lot of rooms as well. Just to be able to tame things down a little bit, isolate that guitar cab a little bit can make all the difference. So more products to think about and look at. Yeah, with just thinking about that too, in terms of like guitar cabinet miking and whatnot, ribbon microphones have really made a resurgence, and those can be a pretty effective home recording tool as well. Putting on bass cabs and using them for a variety of instruments. I think Adam mentioned I'm a cellist primarily, and man, I couldn't live without my ribbon microphone that I have. And it doesn't pick up a lot of the room, but it's very natural sounding and dynamic. And, I love that for a lot of acoustic instruments and, that sort of thing too.
C8A makes a really nice, inexpensive ribbon.
Yeah.
Wonderful on a 4x12.
Good stuff. Yeah, we do a lot of AEA, 7 or 8 different companies making really high quality ribbons now. They're a lot more durable than they used to be in the past too, so you don't have to worry about tearing that ribbon, and can be a great home tool, I think.
Well, do we have any additional questions? So open up for questions now.
Oh, okay, good. I'm 69 and not very good in technology, because on one hand, because I'm a lazy guy, I thought I just play my saxophone. I never cared about saxophone sound when I'm on stage. And so as far as I can hear the band and the monitor works, I'm cool. But since 2015, when I established MFM, I've met so many musicians who have their own home studios, and listening to them really didn't attract me to have my own home studio, especially in Manhattan, in our apartment, one bedroom, it's impossible. But because of COVID, because I'm more a freelance musician, I'm more of a performer, going on tour than composing, recording stuff, what happened is that many, many more people are contacting me and asking me, hey, Saurabh, I love your saxophone. Can you play something on this track and so on? And I was always saying, no, I can't. I don't have a home studio. So I started this garage, what is it called? Garage band, garage. Mm-hmm. And it didn't sound so good, my saxophone. Anyways, because of these webinars and the podcast MFM does, I got my first microphone from Sweetwater, it's the AKG, I don't know the number, but anyway. So then I realized, oh, I got a microphone. Okay, how I'm going to use it? Is it good for vocal or for saxophone? So my question is, for me, being 69 and not really technological wise, and I need a very simple home studio that I can record my voice and my saxophone. So it means 2 inputs, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, Jeffrey said also for a basic home studio with the interface and the right computer, and so the budget would be then around 2,500. No, 2,000 minimum. Correct, Jeffrey?
I mean, it could be lower than that, depending again on the computer. Yeah.
So my question is, should I think with the way I play music and how I do music, blah, 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 forget the idea to have a home studio and go instead to Kevin's studio, who lives a couple of blocks above me, and hire him to do the work? And I love to spend money for my peers. So is it better than, or to Adam, he does my mastering for my 2 recent albums. So what would you say to me, to a person like me, in the how I do and make music, that I live in Manhattan, my age is 69. Can I learn easily a Pro Tool, Ableton, in a way that I get excited to do that? So
yeah, I guess for me, my experiences, because I had this discussion with some of the artists that I've worked with on my label, and I end up doing a lot of the production work for them and the mixing and stuff, as opposed to them doing it themselves. And it comes down to kind of where you see yourself as being most passionate about. If you're starting to take on the production role or actually mixing and stuff like that, what I would recommend for somebody that's just getting started to get a basic setup, like just the focus on the recording aspect, and then send out, once you have like the tracks recorded, because now everything's digital, you don't have to record the tape, you don't have to send DATs to people. You can send files through Dropbox, even so, as long as you get the recording, nice sounding recording, you can, hire out those other things. You don't have to learn, be the jack of all trades or learn everything, because it is very daunting and it's really overwhelming. And to be good at production and mixing on your own, it does take several years of mastery. So, but I would say if you're just starting out, getting that, for me, and Jeff, will turn it over to you on that thought, but getting that recording, and it's a kind of you mentioned that on traveling too, even now that things are opening up, you can record in a hotel room now, just bring your laptop, an interface, and a microphone, So yeah, it's just getting that initial recording, I think, is what I would recommend focusing on in the beginning. So
Yeah, I think you make a lot of good points there, Adam. I was going to say, I know our focus on this is the home recording studio, but in some ways there's no real substitute for a professional studio and a professional engineer. A lot of it is going to be, I work with a lot of creative folks that don't want to dive into the technical side of things at all, or they're scared of it. And I totally understand that sentiment. One thing I'm noticing a lot lately is, I know our focus here has been kind of on the computer, but there are a lot of other ways to record still out there. And for you, Saurabh, and maybe it might be getting like a little Zoom portable recorder or Tascam, where you could still take those files, just plug a USB cable into the computer and, email those over or whatever you need to do. That might be a lot better situation than having to set up the computer and the drivers and learn the software. There's lots of Tascam multi-track recorders that are being sold still. If you're trying to do more than just, play your saxophone, that could be easier to learn instead of, again, dealing with the computer side of things. So there's a lot of other ways to skin the cat there. So that'd be my thoughts, and I think Adam makes a good point too. There's a lot of musicians at home now that are tracking, but then sending off those files to be mixed and mastered, and we're living in a world now where that's an easy thing to do. That way, if you had a little portable Zoom recorder, let's say for $200-300, or like the Tascam, there's a good option. You could experiment with placing it in different spots in your apartment to get the best results. And it's a little bit less of a daunting situation potentially than all the technology that's behind everything else. So maybe some good thoughts there.
Yeah. I've done that stuff.
Yeah, I've got a pretty sophisticated home studio myself, and sometimes I just don't even want to dick around with powering it all up and fooling with it all. And I've got a little Zoom recorder that I'll set up in the room, and I'll play my guitar into it, and then later on I'll put that into the computer and mess around with it that way. There's so many different avenues to pursue. The built-in microphones that are in some of these recorders are surprisingly good at this point.
Yeah.
You can always do a little better by plugging your AKG into that product. But that might be a good way to go.
And then the other thing too is it's fascinating too how technology is these days. Like even recording on one of these little guys, as long as you don't distort, they can clean up recordings with software these days pretty easily, that are have noise reduction and stuff like that too. So.
With all this
Back in the
technology,
day when you pinned the meters.
Can't do anything if you distort.
No, but that was the way to record guitars.
Yeah.
When it was up there, we used to stick a 4x12 underneath the Steinway Grand, mic the strings, stick a brick on the expression pedal. Close mic the cab, stereo mic the strings and the piano. Oh, the 70s were great, man.
But did you ever knock little holes into your speakers and little needles and get your distortion that way from your cabinet?
No, I just pre-master volume. We just dimed everything.
There you go. It worked for Hendrix.
It worked for a lot of people.
Yeah.
speaking of original sound in a recording, like instruments, you always look for an original sound. With Ableton and Pro Tools and all these applications, is it still possible to create a sound originally? Like, let's say, with Jimi Hendrix, it was Kramer, and with the Beatles, it was
George Martin.
Yeah. So when you hear their sound, you know it's them. I mean, is it still possible with a home studio to create a sound which really fits to your composition or to your instrument, without sounding like anybody else?
I think so.
Okay.
You know, they're all just tools, right, that can be used in different ways. And, you know, there's some amazing things coming out of home studios nowadays that have, I think, that kind of sonic imprint from different producers and engineers that way. So yeah, it's just a matter of finding those right tools, I think.
I have a very basic question. I'm kind of like at the stone age of all this stuff. I just have I have a Logic DAW and a my Scarlett 212, and that's it. And a condenser mic and a VTech 600. That actually works quite well, to be honest. For singing for vocals, even in for the studio, I haven't had any problems with it. But my interface, there's the input 2, which I barely use. I'm discovering it is not working. Is it just that's it for that input, or is there something else, like something I can do?
How old is it? The interface?
Oh well, it's. You're talking about at least 6 to 8 years. But it's not like I've used this every day now. I used it more during the pandemic.
What interface is it?
The Scarlett Focusrite, Scarlett 2i2.
Yeah, I had mine died about 8 years. Like one, I don't know. So lifespan of some of these it depends, but like I personally had one of those before. Upgrading to I have the Steinberg UR-RT right now, but yeah, I don't know, it depends. Yeah, I mean, could be the interface itself, or just maybe something in the audio setup. So Jeff, what do you recommend in those cases, in your experience in the lifespan of some of these interfaces?
If it's one of the very earliest Scarletts, I'm guessing if it's not some kind of audio routing or setup situation, then if one of the inputs is dead, then it's going to be dead, and it's frankly not going to be worth fixing.
Yeah,
I would probably look to upgrade at this point, if you can. But I don't know if you bought it from Sweetwater or not. We've got tech support that can help, but that's not my side of the fence, so I'm not sure how to troubleshoot that. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but anyway, yeah, sorry to hear the problem, but I'm guessing more than likely, yeah, it's probably dead, and yeah, I doubt if it could be fixed for a reasonable price point. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I kind of lied earlier. I mentioned the Apollo maybe as being our biggest selling interface, but I'll backtrack on that. The Scarlett, is really popular. I mean, everybody knows that little red box, and it's everywhere, and it's a great interface on many levels. So.
How much is it, Jeffrey?
They make a huge variety depending on the size. So the smallest one is called the Solo, which actually has 2 inputs and 2 outputs on it. And I want to say it's right around $100, maybe slightly more. Oh. And it just goes up from there depending on the size. So yeah, it's that's a great starting point for a lot of folks in their home studios, and that might work well forever. Although
I do not recommend what the interface I have right now if you're on a PC, because I ran into an issue with the Yamaha ASIO drivers with the Steinberg, because Yamaha provides the drivers for Steinberg's interface, and it's not like I'm getting dropouts, so I switched to the generic ASIO and I'm fine. So so I think definitely don't recommend them if you get a PC, if you have a PC.
Fun with drivers, yes. Yeah. Actually, that's I know when we were talking about DAWs earlier, we kind of glossed right over it. I'm glad, is it Angelo that brought it up, that using Logic, $199 program is absolutely incredible, everything that's included with that. And that could be a good starting point for a lot of folks as well. Of course, that one is going to be Mac only. But it's, incredible value for the money, hard to beat.
I was lucky. This is a refurbished computer, and the guy gave me the because he saw I was a musician, so he gave me the Logic for free.
Nice.
I'd like to give a thumbs up to Mark of the Unicorn, the M2.
Yeah.
I've been using a digital performer before it was actually audio, when it was just sequencing and you had to stripe the edge track of your tape machine with SMPTE. But I've got an M2 now, and that works with both Performer and Pro Tools. So it's flawless. I haven't had a problem. I've been using it for over a year, and I use the old FireWire thing, the initial FireWire thing for years with no problem, and they're good. I like Performer because years ago it was what everybody who's doing film was using. And it has a native thing where you can import a video in QuickTime and just score right to picture, boom, just like that. I'm sure there's other stuff now. I'm kind of just doing business on my own. I'm not doing for hire anymore, but I still like Performer. It's very intuitive. It works like an old tape machine.
Yeah. I have to agree with you on that one. I think it's a lot of folks kind of gloss over Motu nowadays because they've been around for so long and they're not the latest and greatest with what they offer. But I still think Digital Performer is a brilliant DAW. And specifically the interfaces you mentioned, the M2 and they have the M4, which is the larger version of it, have the best metering that I've seen in terms of input metering that way, which something a lot of folks don't think about. You know, they're used to just a couple LCDs or LEDs, and having like a serious display with that kind of resolution can make a nice difference. Yeah.
You know, it's really great. I mean, my studio fits into a briefcase, you know, so, you know, I moved between the Pocono Mountains and New York City, and it's a pretty easy move. You know?
Yeah, actually, you know, one thing I was just looking at my notes, guys, and I thought I might add this as far as just what I think are some of the common mistakes that are made when folks are putting a home studio together. And I know we've touched on a lot of this. And, you know, I'll tell you one thing that I see over and over again, and this is a horrible thing as a gear salesperson to say, but, you know, buying too much at once or buying things that are too complicated just lead to frustration. And it's a case where, you know, you can look at pick a piece of software like a virtual keyboard of some sort. It might have hundreds of knobs on it and parameters and whatnot. And there's so many out there. Just to learn this kind of stuff in any kind of detail, I urge a lot of folks, start simple, start with the basics, start with things, you know, that are high quality that you're not going to have to repurchase again. And that could be, you know, anything from microphones, guitars, keyboards, you know, software, whatever, and learn that to the best of your ability, and then continue to purchase and add, and, you know, to where you need to get. But I was just thinking about that as I think a common situation there. You know, it's not uncommon for folks to, you know, they get their new credit card or they get approved for financing, and the next thing you know, they're buying, you know, 25 different things that, you know, each one of those potentially could take years to learn properly. And that just leads to frustration. And it kind of leads back to what we were talking about, where, you know, it might make more sense, you know, like what you were saying, Saurabh, with, you know, getting your basic tracking done in your home studio, and then, you know, utilizing the expertise of, you know, professional studios and professional engineers, you know, to kind of help suss through that. So I think it's all kind of tied together that way.
Yeah, I like that. You know, I had a younger fellow who's one of my students came into my place the other day, and, you know, I've got like tweed fenders and a vintage Hiwatt and a vintage Marshall. He goes, man, why don't you just get a Kemper? Like, too many knobs.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I turn this on and I turn it up to here. It sounds good. So,
you know, there's a reason when you go into a lot of professional studios, they might have a whole rack full of gear, but let's say they've got like a Fairchild compressor that has 2 knobs on it. It does what it does brilliantly. It doesn't try to do 12,000 other things.
thank you.
And you know, learning things on that level, I think, is important. And there's a reason that like a lot of the high professional gear, limits your options, and leads to more creativity and a better way to use the tools. So, yeah.
As long as I don't have to move it, I'm fine.
There you go.
So I guess we're about 10 minutes left, I guess, so Rob, and I'll make sure I make the announcement before we start wrapping up. But so the MFM, we do these webinars pretty regularly, and we have another one coming up with bassist and MFM member Randy Landau and guitarist bassist Jerome Harris, and they're speaking on music, the basses, and the business. And that's going to be on July 18th at 5 p.m. And yeah, so, and of course, if you noticed our fearless leader, so Rob, wearing the MFM t-shirt, those are available for purchase as well. So if you want to support the organization with a t-shirt, that's if you go to musiciansformusicians.org and click on merch, you'll find the t-shirts there, and you can get official MFM t-shirt. So yeah, we want to thank you guys all for coming out today. And
one more thing.
And yeah, turn it over to you, Saurabh.
It's about Jeffrey, because Jeffrey joined MFM, so he offered that members who want to purchase items, products from Sweetwater, that he's trying to get a nice discount for us. So for members, please call or email Jeffrey, because it seems like for every product there's a price line. So he can't give a discount, but it will be like between 5 and 10%, if I'm correct, depending on the item. So there's something you can get out of it when you be an MFM member. The other thing is that I would like also to spread out the word, not through me or through Adam or Jeffrey or so. Everybody who got something out of MFM and is willing to advocate MFM's missions, please do so on your own, because we need professional musicians who have a certain attitude, which I call musician with attitude. So now it's the time that we come together. There are other musicians' rights organizations. We have a union, of course. But if you feel like that MFM is the right place to join, please join, because only numbers speak. And I assure you that with Adam and Jeffrey around us, around me, we can do a lot of things. And I love to see that musicians help out. So this is the idea of these webinars, that first of all, members of our organization try to share their knowledge and wisdom of what they're doing well. And we invite only sometimes people from outside, just to get more knowledge and wisdom from people outside. And maybe we can convince them to join MFM. So I love to see you back again. You will get from Adam or from me the link to this webinar video recording. So, and if you have any questions, please get back to me or to Adam or to Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
By the way, what's that resonator behind you?
That is let's see, an old Fender, actually.
Oh.
Not that high quality. It's okay. Fun to jam on. Nice to meet all you guys.
Yep.
Thank you.
Night.
Good. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good weekend.